Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. Thanks again to all my wonderful Patreon supporters. Several of the videos that you've seen in the last few weeks have been directly suggested by them. If you would like to become a Patreon donor, feel free to go to the link, patreon.com/bowtiewhisperguide, and help me out. I appreciate it, and I'd love to make a video just for you. But let's get back to the Hobbit. He could not swim. He thought, too, of the nasty, slimy things with big, bulging eyes wriggling in the water. There are strange things living in the pools and the lakes and the hearts of mountain. Deep down here, by the dark water, lived old Gollum. A small, slimy creature. I don't know where he came from, nor who he was or what he was. He was Gollum. As dark as darkness, except for two big, round, pale eyes in his thin face. He had a little boat, and he rowed about quite quietly on the lake, for a lake it was, wide and deep and deadly cold. He paddled with it, his large feet dangling over the side, but never a ripple did he make, not he. He was looking out of his pale, lamp-like eyes for blind fish, which he grabbed with his long fingers as quick as thinking. He liked meat, too. Goblin, he thought good when he could get it, but he took care that they never found him out. He just throttled them from behind if they came down alone anywhere near the edge of the water while he was prowling about. They very seldom did, for they had a feeling that something unpleasant was lurking down there, down at the very roots of the mountains. They had come on the lake when they were tunneling down long ago, and they found they could go no further, and so their road ended in that direction, and there was no reason to go that way, unless the great goblin sent them. Sometimes he took a fancy for fish from the lake, and sometimes neither goblin nor fish came back. Actually, Goblin lived on a slimy island of rock in the middle of the lake. He was watching Bilbo from the distance with his pale eyes like telescopes. Bilbo could not see him, but he was wondering a lot about Bilbo, for he could see that he was no goblin at all. Gollum got into his boat and shot off from the island, while Bilbo was sitting on the brink, altogether flummoxed, and at the end of his way and his wits. Suddenly up came Gollum, and whispered and hissed, "Bless us and splash us, my precious. I guess it's a choice feast. At least a tasty morsel it make us, Gollum." And when he said Gollum, he made a horrible swallowing noise in his throat. That's how he got his name, though he always called himself my precious. The Hobbit nearly jumped out of his skin when the hiss came in his ears, and he suddenly saw the pale eyes sticking out at him. "Who are you?" he said, thrusting his dagger in front of him. "What is he, my precious?" whispered Gollum, who always spoke to himself, though never having anyone else to speak to. This is what he had come to find out, for he was not really very hungry at the moment, only curious. Otherwise he would have grabbed first and whispered afterwards. I am Mr. Bilbo Baggins, and I have lost the dwarves, and I have lost the wizard, and I don't know where I am, and I don't want to know if I can only get away." "What has he got in his hands?" said Gollum, looking at the sword, which he did not quite like. "A sword, a blade that came out of Gondolin," said Gollum, and he became quite polite. "Perhaps he sits here and chats with it a bit, my precious. It likes riddles. Perhaps it does it?" He was anxious to appear friendly, at any rate for the moment, until he found out more about the sword and the Hobbit, and whether he was really quite alone, really, and whether he was good to eat, and whether Gollum was really hungry. Riddles were all he could think of. Asking them, and sometimes guessing them, had been the only game he had ever played with other funny creatures sitting in their holes in the long, long ago, before he lost all his friends and was driven away alone and crept down down into the dark under the mountains. Very well, said Bilbo. He was anxious to agree until he found out more about this creature, whether he was quite alone, and whether he was fierce or hungry, or whether he was a friend of the goblins. You ask first, he said, because he had not had time to think of a riddle. So Gollum hissed, What has roots as nobody sees, is taller than trees, up it goes, but never grows. Easy, said Bilbo. Mountains, I suppose. Does it grass easy? It must have a competition with us, my precious. If Precious asks and it doesn't answer, we eats it, my precious. If it asks us and we doesn't answer, we does what it wants, We shows it the way out, yes. All right, said Bilbo, not daring to disagree, and nearly bursting his brain to think of riddles that could save him from being eaten. 30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still. That was all he could think of to ask. The idea of being eaten was rather on his mind. It was rather an old one, too, and Gollum knew the answer as well as you do. Chestnuts, chestnuts, he hissed. Teeth, teeth, my precious. But we has only 6. Then he asked his second. Voiceless it cries, wingless flutters, toothless bites, mouthless mutters. Half a moment, cried Bilbo, who was still thinking uncomfortably about eating. Fortunately, he had heard something rather like this before, and getting his wits back, he thought of the answer. Wind, wind, of course, he said, and he was so pleased he made one up on the spot. This'll puzzle this nasty little underground creature, he thought. An eye in a blue face saw an eye in a green face. That eye is like to this eye, said the first eye, but in low place, not high place. Said Gollum. He had been underground a long, long time, and he was forgetting this sort of thing. But just as Bilbo was beginning to hope that the wretch would not be able to answer, Gollum brought up memories of ages and ages and ages before, when he lived with his grandmother in a hole in a bank by the river. My precious, he said. Sun on the daisies, it means it does. But these ordinary and above-ground and everyday sort of riddles were tiring for him. Also, they reminded him of days when he had been less lonely and sneaky and nasty, and that put him out of temper. What is more, they made him hungry. So this time he tried something a bit more difficult and more unpleasant. It cannot be seen, cannot be felt, cannot be heard, cannot be smelt. It lies behind stars and under hills, and empty holes it fills. It comes first and follows after, ends life, kills laughter. Unfortunately for Gollum, Bilbo had heard that sort of thing before. An answer was all around him anyway. Dark, he said, without even scratching his head or putting on his thinking cap. A box without hinges, key, or lid, yet golden treasure inside is hid. He asked to gain time, until he could think of something really hard. This, he thought, was a dreadfully easy chestnut, though he had not asked it in the usual words. But it proved a nasty poser for Gollum. He hissed to himself, and still he did not answer. He whispered and spluttered. After some time, Bilbo became impatient. Well, what is it? He said. The answer's not a kettle boiling over, as you seem to think from the noise you're making. Give us a chance. Let it give us a chance, my precious. Well, said Bilbo, after giving him a good long chance, what about your guess? But suddenly Gollum remembered thieving from nests long ago, and sitting under the river bank, teaching his grandmother to suck. Eggses, he hissed. Eggses it is. Then he asked, alive without breath, as cold as death, never thirsty, ever drinking, all in mail, never clinking. He also, in turn, thought this was a dreadfully easy one, because he was always thinking of the answer. But he could not remember anything better at the moment. He was so flustered by the egg question. All the same, it was quite a poser for poor Bilbo, who had never had anything to do with the water if he could help it. I imagine you know the answer, of course, or can guess it as easy as winking, since you are sitting comfortably at home and have not the danger of being eaten to disturb your thinking. Bilbo cleared his throat once or twice, but no answer came. After a while, Gollum began to hiss with pleasure to himself. "Is it nice, my precious? Is it juicy? Is it scrumptiously crunchable?" He began to peer at Bilbo out of the darkness. "Half a moment," said Bilbo, shivering. I gave you a good long chance just now." "It must make haste," said Gollum, beginning to climb out of his boat onto the shore to get at Bilbo. But when he put his long, webby foot in the water, a fish jumped out in fright and fell on Bilbo's toes. "Ugh!" he said. "It's cold and clammy." So he guessed. "Fish! Fish!" he cried. "It's fish!" Gollum was dreadfully disappointed, but Bilbo asked another riddle as quick as he could, so that Gollum had to get back into his boat and think. No legs lay on one leg. 2 legs sat near 3 legs. 4 legs got some. It was not really the right time for this riddle, but Bilbo was in a hurry. Gollum might have had some trouble guessing at it if he had asked it at another time. As it was talking about fish, no legs was not so very difficult, and after that the rest was easy. Fish on the little table, a man at the table sitting on a stool, the cat has the bones. That, of course, is the answer, and Gollum soon gave it. Then he thought it was time to ask something hard and horrible. This is what he said. "This thing all things devours, birds, beasts, trees, flowers, gnaws iron, bites steel, grinds hard stones to meal, slays kings, ruins town, and beats high mountain down." Poor Bilbo sat in the dark thinking of all the horrible names of all the giants and ogres he had ever heard told of in tales, but not one of them seemed to have done all of these things. He had a feeling the answer was quite something different, and he ought to know it, but he could not think of it. He began to get frightened, and that was bad for thinking. Gollum was getting out of his boat. He flapped into the water and paddled to the bank. Bilbo could see his eyes coming towards him. His tongue seemed to stick in his mouth. He wanted to shout, "Give me more time! Give me more time!" But all that came out was a sudden squeal, "Time! Time!" Bilbo was saved by pure luck, for that, of course, was the answer. Gollum was disappointed once more, and now he was getting angry and also tired of this game. It had made him very hungry indeed, and this time he did not go back in the boat. He sat down in the dark by Bilbo, made the Hobbit most dreadfully uncomfortable, and scattered his wits. "It has got to ask us a question, my precious. Yes, yes, yes. Just one more question to guess. Yes, yes," said Gollum. But Bilbo simply could not think of any question. That nasty, wet, cold thing sitting next to him, pawing and poking at him. He scratched himself. He pinched himself. Still, he could not think of anything. Ask us, said Gollum. Bilbo pinched himself and slapped himself. He gripped his little sword. He even felt in his pocket with his other hand. There he found the ring he had picked up in the passage and forgotten about. "What have I got in my pocket?" he said out loud. He was thinking to himself, but Gollum thought it was a riddle, and he was frightfully upset. "Not fair! Not fair!" he hissed. "It isn't fair, my precious, to ask us what it's got in its nasty little pocketses." Bilbo, seeing what had happened, and having nothing better to ask, stuck with the question. "What have I got in my pocket?" he said louder. Hissed Gollum. "It must give us 3 guesses, my precious. 3 guesses." "Very well, guess away," said Bilbo. "Handses," said Gollum. "Wrong," said Bilbo, who luckily had taken his hands out. "Guess again," said Gollum, who was more upset than ever. He thought of the things he kept in his own pockets. Fish bones, goblin's teeth, wet shells, a bit of bat wing, a sharp stone to sharpen his fangs on, and other nasty things. He tried to think of what other people kept in their pockets. "Knife," he said at last. "Wrong," said Bilbo, who had lost his some time ago. "Last guess." Now Gollum was in a much worse state than when Bilbo had asked him the egg question. He hissed and he spluttered and he rocked himself backwards and forwards. He slapped his feet on the floor. He wriggled and squirmed, but still he did not dare waste his last guess. "Come on," said Bilbo. "I am waiting." He tried to sound bold and cheerful, but he did not feel at all sure how this game was going to end, whether Gollum guessed right or not. "Time's up," he said. "String or nothing!" shrieked Gollum, which was not quite fair, working in two guesses for the one. "Both wrong!" cried Bilbo, very much relieved, and he jumped up at once to his feet, put his back to the nearest wall, and held out his little sword. He knew, of course, that the riddle game was sacred and of immense antiquity, and even wicked creatures were afraid to cheat when they played at it. But he felt he could not trust this slimy thing to keep any promise at a pinch. Any excuse would do for him to slide out of it, and after all, that last question had not been a genuine riddle according to the ancient laws. But at any rate, Gollum did not attack him. He could see the sword in Bilbo's hand. He sat still, shivering and whispering. At last Bilbo could wait no longer. "Well," he said, "what about your promise? I want to go. You must show me the way." "Did we say so, precious? Show the nasty little Baggins is the way out, yes, yes. But what has he got in his pockets, Not string, precious, but not nothing. Oh no, Gollum!" "Never you mind," said Bilbo. "A promise is a promise." "Cross it is. Impatient, precious," hissed Gollum. "But it must wait. Yes, it must. We can't go up the tunnel so hasty. We must go and get some things first. Yes, some things to help us." "Well, hurry up," said Bilbo, relieved to think that Gollum was going away. He thought he was just going to make an excuse and not come back. What was Gollum talking about? What useful thing could he keep out on the dark lake? But he was wrong. Gollum did mean to come back. He was angry now and hungry, and he was a miserable, wicked creature, and he already had a plan. Not far away was his island, of which Bilbo knew nothing, and there was a hiding place where he kept a few wretched oddments and one very beautiful thing. Very beautiful, very wonderful. He had a ring, a golden ring, a precious ring. "My birthday present," he whispered to himself, as he often did in the endless dark days. "That's what we wants now, yes, we wants it." He wanted it because it was a ring of power. If you slipped that ring on your finger, you were invisible. Only in the full sunlight could you be seen, and even then only by your shadow, and that would be shaky and faint. "My birthday present. It came to me on my birthday, my precious." So he had always said to himself, but who knows how Gollum came by that present ages ago in the old days, when such rings were still at large in the world. Perhaps even the master who ruled them could have said. Gollum used to wear it at first till it tired him, and he kept it in a pouch next to his skin till it galled him, and now he usually hid it in a hole in the rock on an island, and always going back to look at it. And if you want to find out what will happen when Gollum finds out the ring is no longer there, well, tune in next time. Thank you, and I'll talk to you soon.